Welcome back. Ready for a bit of a time travel adventure?
Yeah, we're going way back to the 70s and 80s.
The era of, disco and leg warmers.
And even more important for us, the birth of traditional D&D.
So we're going to be exploring those really early forms of the game, first edition AD&D.
Even some of the stuff even before that.
And we'll be comparing and contrasting it with what you guys are all playing now, modern D&D Pathfinder.
You know, a lot of modern players might be surprised at how much stuff you love in 5th edition or Pathfinder actually has roots going all the way back to those early versions.
I know, I was pretty surprised reading through our source material today.
Yeah, a lot of modern players think of old school D&D as, I don't know, just kind of a simplified or more basic version.
Right, like it's 5e, but, I don't know, less balanced.
Yeah. But it was so much more than that. It was its own distinct style of play. It was gritty, it was challenging, and it really put a premium on creativity.
Both for the players.
And the Dungeon Master.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Hit me with some of the biggest differences.
Okay, well, one of the first things that really jumps out at you when you look at old school D&D is how alignments were treated.
Oh, yeah, alignments. I remember seeing those on my character sheet.
Right, but in traditional D&D, they weren't just personality traits or role-playing suggestions.
They were more than that.
Oh, yeah. It was like a cosmic battleground between law and chaos, good and evil.
Whoa, heavy.
Your alignment could impact how NPCs reacted to you, what magic items you could use, and even like how effective your spells were.
Hold on, so like my character's alignment could actually make my spells stronger or weaker.
Exactly. It wasn't just a label. It had real weight in the game world.
That's interesting. It's like your alignment was this kind of cosmic force shaping your character's destiny.
It was, and it could even influence the actions of the gods.
Wow. Okay, so alignments were serious business in traditional D&D.
Oh, absolutely.
What else was different? Our source material mentioned something called encumbrance.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what I think it is?
That's the one. Forget your bottomless bags of holding, my friend. In traditional D&D, every single copper piece and suit of armor mattered.
You're kidding, like actually tracking the weight of everything.
Yeah. Think about it, like meticulously tracking the weight of every item in your inventory.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It could be, but it also made the game more strategic. It added this layer of realism and grit that you don't always get in modern D&D.
I can only imagine the arguments that would erupt during inventory management.
Yeah.
So if every copper piece mattered, I guess selling treasure and managing gold was a huge part of the game.
It was. Resource management was paramount in traditional D&D. Everything was precious. Your gold, torches, arrows, spell components, you name it.
Wow, that's intense.
Imagine you're deep in a dungeon, right? You're laden with treasure, and suddenly, ambush, goblins.
Not the goblins.
Do you fight weighed down by all your loot, or do you ditch some of your hard-earned riches to make a quick getaway? Those were the kind of choices you had to make.
Yeah, that's a tough call. I can see how that would make things way more interesting.
And then there's divine intervention.
Okay, so this is where my cleric begs their god for help and suddenly lightning bolts are raining down on my enemies.
Well, not quite. It was more like this. Your party's in a desperate battle, on the verge of being wiped out.
High stakes.
Right, so your cleric, they cry out to their god, pleading for aid.
Praying for a miracle, huh?
Exactly. And the DM, they would have the cleric roll percentile dice.
Percentile dice.
100-sided die.
Okay. I think I've seen one of those before.
Right. And based on the roll and, of course, the situation, their god might intervene.
So no guarantees.
Nope. Could be a burst of divine energy, healing wounds, could even be a well-placed distraction.
Or just crickets.
Sometimes, yeah, the gods work in mysterious ways, but the possibility was always there.
So it was like this element of what? Like unpredictable divine drama?
Totally. It really heightened the tension and made those moments when the gods did intervene all the more epic.
Okay, I can see how that would add a whole other layer to the game.
It was awesome. And you never knew when a miracle might occur.
And you definitely had to earn those miracles. It sounds like traditional D&D was big on exploration.
Oh, yeah. Exploration was a core part of the game. Dungeons weren't just linear paths to the final boss fight.
They weren't.
Nope, they were sprawling, intricate environments full of secrets to uncover, traps to avoid.
And probably a few wandering monsters lurking in the shadows.
Oh, absolutely. So players had to be actively engaged with the environment, making choices about where to go, what to investigate.
It sounds like they had to be more proactive, thinking like a real explorer instead of just following a preset path.
Exactly. And that made exploration so much more rewarding. Discovering a hidden passage, stumbling upon a lost treasure chamber, or even just encountering a terrifying new monster. That was a thrill in itself.
I get it. It's like the joy of discovery, the feeling of actually exploring a mysterious and dangerous world.
It was. Traditional D&D put the D in dungeon.
It definitely did. And it sounds like all this put a lot of responsibility on the dungeon master's shoulders.
For sure. Our document mentions this thing called the rulings not rules philosophy.
Okay, rulings not rules. What does that even mean?
Basically, it meant that dungeon masters were encouraged to use their judgment and make decisions on the fly.
So like improvising.
Exactly. Adapting to unexpected player actions, maybe creating unique scenarios that weren't explicitly covered in the rule books.
So it was less about sticking rigidly to the rules and more about creating an engaging and dynamic experience.
Right. The DM had the power to make rulings based on the situation, the story, what made sense in the moment.
That sounds like it required a lot of trust between the players and the dungeon master.
Oh, tons.
Yeah.
The players needed to trust that the DM was fair, that they wouldn't abuse that power, and the DM needed to trust that the players would, be creative, be engaged, and roll with the punches.
It was a true partnership.
It was. And that collaborative spirit extended to how the game dealt with character skill versus, character stats.
Huh. Interesting. So what was the difference there?
In traditional D&D, your cleverness as a player actually mattered more than just having a high number on your character sheet.
So it wasn't just about rolling dice to see if you succeeded.
Not always. Let's say there's a trap, right? Instead of just rolling to see if their character spots it, a player might have to actually describe how their character is searching for it.
That makes sense. So I'm carefully examining the walls, I'm testing the floorboard.
And listening for any suspicious clicking sounds.
Exactly. They had to use their imagination, really think about how their character would approach the situation.
So it was more about role-playing your skills, not just relying on a dice roll.
Yes. It was about engaging with the world, using your character's knowledge and abilities to interact with it in a meaningful way.
That's really cool. And it sounds like it would have made the game much more immersive for the players.
It definitely did.
Now, in a game where player skill was so important, I imagine the characters themselves would have to be, a little more vulnerable. Oh yeah, characters in traditional D&D, they were heroic for sure, but they were still human. Or, elven or dwarven.
Right, but still, not invincible superheroes.
No, they could get hurt, they could make mistakes.
And they could definitely die.
Absolutely. So there was this real sense of danger, a feeling that the stakes were high.
Yeah, every encounter was a risk.
Exactly. Every victory felt hard-won. It made the game so much more exciting and suspenseful.
I can see how that would be a big departure from some of the more balanced and predictable approaches you see in modern D&D.
Oh, traditional D&D. It embraced the unpredictable. Some classes were definitely stronger than others, especially at higher levels. And dungeons, forget about them being scaled to your level.
Whoa, so you could just wander into an area and suddenly find yourself completely outmatched.
Totally. Which meant sometimes the best tactic was to just run away.
Seriously?
Seriously. Or come up with a clever plan, use the environment to your advantage.
It sounds terrifying, but also kind of awesome. Like the world felt more dangerous and real.
It did. It kept you on your toes, forced you to think strategically.
It seems like traditional D&D was all about creating that truly immersive and challenging experience.
It was about embracing the unknown, the risks, and the thrill of adventure.
Yeah.
Trusting the players and the DM to, create a memorable story together.
And speaking of memorable, can we talk about the infamous save or die mechanic?
Ah, yes. Save or die.
It was as terrifying as it sounds, right?
Oh, absolutely. Certain spells, traps, monster abilities, they could instantly kill your character.
No second chances.
If you failed your saving throw, you were toast.
Yeah.
No death saving throws or anything like that.
Brutal.
It was. But it also added a level of tension that's hard to replicate in modern D&D. Every decision felt weighty because you knew a single bad roll could be the end.
Yeah, it really shows how different the design philosophy was back then.
It was all about risk, the very real possibility of failure. It made for a much more visceral experience, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it's clear from our source material that traditional D&D was, at its core, a storytelling game.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just about mechanics or combat. It was about creating this shared narrative, this epic tale.
Even combat was approached from that narrative perspective.
Interesting. So combat wasn't just about rolling dice and min-maxing your attacks.
Nope. It was dynamic, cinematic, almost like a scene from a movie.
So how did that work in practice?
The dungeon master would describe the scene in vivid detail, painting a picture of the unfolding battle.
Okay, I could picture that.
Right. And the players would describe their actions, their attacks, their maneuvers in a way that brought the combat to life.
I see. So it was this back and forth, this collaborative storytelling that was happening.
Exactly. It was about creating those memorable moments of heroism, of daring escapes, of those crazy twists of fate.
It sounds like it was more free-flowing and improvisational than the kind of structured combat we often see in modern D&D.
It was. It was about capturing the excitement, the drama, the sheer epicness of a battle, from exploration and combat to even something as simple as managing your resources.
Yeah, it's like every element of the game was geared towards creating this immersive and engaging narrative experience.
That's the beauty of it. And nowhere was that emphasis on storytelling more apparent than in how traditional D&D handled role-playing.
Role-playing, okay. I'm all ears. Tell me more about that.
Instead of relying on skill checks and dice rolls for every social interaction, players were expected to actually role-play those situations.
So what, like actually acting out their characters?
In a way, yes. They had to use their words, their wit, their characters' personalities to persuade people, deceive them, charm them.
Oh, I can see how that would lead to some really fun moments.
It did. Think about it. Instead of just saying, I try to persuade the guard to let us in,
Right.
the player would have to describe how they're doing it. What does their character say? What's their tone of voice like? What kind of body language are they using?
This was about bringing those interactions to life.
Exactly. And it made social encounters so much more engaging and memorable.
And probably a lot more unpredictable, too.
Oh, definitely. You never knew what your fellow players would come up with.
It's amazing how traditional D&D managed to put so much emphasis on the narrative aspects of the game.
It's true. It was a very different approach from some of the more mechanics-heavy games we see today.
But it's a good reminder that, at the end of the day, D&D is a storytelling game.
It is. The rules are there to provide a framework, but the real magic happens when players and the DM work together to create a story.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, I'm curious about this thing, our document called survival.
Oh, yeah. Survival was a much bigger element in traditional D&D.
Really?
It was. Players had to track their food and water supplies, manage their equipment, and they even had to worry about things like exhaustion, weather, disease.
Oh, that sounds like a lot to keep in mind.
It was, but it made the world feel more real, the stakes higher.
You couldn't just waltz into a dungeon unprepared.
Not at all.
It was like those choices actually had consequences.
They did. And it forced players to think strategically about resource management, to plan their journeys carefully.
I bet that led to some pretty intense moments.
Oh, yeah. More than a few close calls because the party ran out of food or water.
Or maybe they pushed themselves too hard and ended up collapsing from exhaustion.
It happened, but it was all part of the challenge, part of what made traditional D&D so immersive and engaging.
Now, one last thing I wanted to ask about before we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Our document mentions this thing called henchmen and hirelings.
Ah, yes, henchmen and hirelings.
It sounds like building a party wasn't just about choosing your class. You could actually hire NPCs to fight alongside you.
That's right. It was a common practice in traditional D&D.
So like you're building a small army.
Kind of. It added this whole other layer of strategy and management to the game.
Okay, I can see how that would get complicated. So how did it work?
Well, you could hire NPCs to do all sorts of things, to fight alongside you, to carry your gear, maybe even to provide some specialized skills that your party was lacking.
That sounds really interesting. So were there like rules about how much you had to pay these NPCs or how to treat them?
There were. And you also had to consider their personalities, their loyalties. A loyal henchman might become a close friend, while a treacherous hireling might betray you at the worst possible moment.
Oh, so there was an element of risk involved.
Absolutely. It made things very interesting.
It sounds like henchmen and hirelings added a lot of depth and complexity to the game.
They did, and they created some great role-playing opportunities, too.
And how much the game really emphasized player skill and creativity.
Right. It was a totally different beast from what a lot of modern players might expect.
It was. One thing that keeps coming up in our research is how traditional D&D wasn't so focused on, game balance.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Traditional D&D didn't really care about balance in the same way that modern games do.
So some classes were actually intentionally overpowered at higher levels.
Yeah, it wasn't really a primary design goal back then.
That's pretty wild compared to the super balanced approach you see in 5th edition.
Yeah, like a magic user, for example.
Oh yeah, the classic spellcasters.
They were pretty weak at low levels, right? But once they started leveling up,
Left those high-level spells.
they became incredibly potent.
Wielding godlike power.
Pretty much. While a fighter, on the other hand,
Those martial classes?
they might start out really strong,
Yeah, hitting hard right out the gate.
but they wouldn't see that same kind of dramatic power spike as they leveled up.
Interesting. So it's kind of like different classes excelled at different stages of the game?
Yeah. And on top of that, the dungeons themselves weren't scaled to the party's level.
Whoa, so you can walk into a dungeon and suddenly realize,
So way out your depth.
like facing down against monsters way more powerful than you.
Totally. That's why running away was a totally legitimate tactic in traditional D&D.
Seriously.
Oh yeah. Sometimes discretion was the better part of valor.
It sounds like that unpredictability would have kept things pretty exciting.
It definitely did. You never knew what you were going to encounter around the next corner.
And it made every decision feel more important.
Right. Because you knew things could go south really quickly.
I'm curious to hear more about how that manifested in the actual game design, like in terms of character options and customization.
Okay, well, traditional D&D didn't have the vast array of character options that we see in modern games.
So it was more streamlined?
Much more. You had your core classes and races.
And that was pretty much it.
Pretty much. There weren't a ton of subclasses or feats or anything like that.
That's so different from 5th edition, with all its options and customization.
It is. But that simplicity actually forced players to be more creative within those constraints.
Interesting. So instead of just picking a subclass that perfectly fit your concept,
You had to work within the existing framework and use your imagination to flesh out your character.
so it's more about role-playing your character's personality and backstory.
Exactly, and about finding creative ways to make them unique within the confines of the rules.
Did this affect multi-classing at all?
Yeah, multiclassing was much more limited in traditional D&D.
And it often came with pretty significant drawbacks.
Right, it wasn't as common or as streamlined as it is in modern games.
So players really had to specialize in their chosen class.
They did, and find creative ways to make their characters stand out within those boundaries.
It's a reminder that sometimes less is more.
It is. Sometimes having fewer options can actually make you more creative.
And it can lead to some really unique and memorable characters.
That's one of the things I love about traditional D&D.
It wasn't afraid to be different.
It challenged players to think differently.
It's been a real eye-opener, seeing how those early editions shaped the game we know and love today.
Yeah, for sure. And today we're tackling the final piece of the puzzle, the role of the all-powerful Dungeon Master.
Ah, yes, the DM. The one who guides us through the perils of the dungeon.
And so much more than that. In traditional D&D, the Dungeon Master wasn't just a referee or a game facilitator.
There were more than that.
Oh yeah, way more. Think of them as a world builder, a storyteller,
An improvisational actor,
sometimes a therapist.
and definitely a game designer, all rolled into one.
Exactly. They had to wear a lot of hats.
Sounds like a pretty demanding gig. So what set a traditional D&D dungeon master apart from how, DMs run things today?
Well, back then, there weren't nearly as many pre-written settings or modules.
Oh, right, like all those official campaign books we have now.
Yeah, those barely existed back then. So
Really?
dungeon masters often had to create entire worlds from scratch.
No kidding. Like building everything from the ground up.
Totally. Continents, kingdoms, cultures, histories, monsters, magic systems,
The whole 9 yards.
the whole enchilada. And they had to fill those worlds with unique details, stuff that would capture the players' imaginations.
Wow, that's some serious creative responsibility.
Yeah.
It must have taken a lot of, imagination and dedication.
It did. But it also gave those early DMs an incredible amount of ownership over their creations.
Right, it was their world.
Exactly. Their vision, their passion. It wasn't just some pre-packaged setting.
I imagine it made the game feel more personal, more intimate.
Oh, absolutely. The players knew that they were experiencing something truly unique, something that their DM had poured their heart and soul into. The players had to trust that the DM was being fair, that they weren't abusing their power.
And the DM had to trust that the players would respect their decisions, that they would play along with the spirit of the game.
It was a partnership, a collaboration, a shared experience that really relied on that mutual respect.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into traditional D&D, I'm wondering, what are the biggest lessons we can take away from those early dungeon masters?
That's a good question. I think one of the most important lessons is the importance of embracing the unpredictable.
Letting go of control.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to let the story unfold organically, even if it takes you in unexpected directions. Creating memories together, that's what makes it special.
Couldn't agree more. And finally, I think it's important to remember that the rules are just a framework. They're there to guide us, but they shouldn't limit our creativity or our storytelling potential.
Don't be afraid to bend or break the rules if it makes the game more fun, more engaging, more yours.
Embrace that spirit of rulings, not rules.
And let your imagination run wild.
Well said. Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into traditional D&D. It's been an incredible journey, wouldn't you say?
It really has. It's amazing to see how much of what we love about the game today can be traced back to those early editions.
We've explored its origins, uncovered its hidden depths, and discovered how its legacy continues to inspire us.
We've learned about the importance of player agency, the power of collaborative storytelling.
And the enduring appeal of a game that embraces the unexpected.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. So as you embark on your next D&D adventure, whether it's in 5th edition, Pathfinder, or even a retro clone of a classic edition, remember those lessons from traditional D&D.
Did you enjoy video? Consider tossing support on my Patreon. It's best way to support orcs. If you would like to see more content, subscribe and post comments below. It better not be bad.
Embrace the chaos, trust your fellow players, and never underestimate the power of a great dungeon master.
And most importantly,
Have fun.
keep those dice rolling, and until next time.